Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. Today we are going to be taking a look at the PC performance for Metro Exodus, which is hands down the most graphically intensive and brutal game that I have ever benchmarked on graphics cards. So we're going to be taking a look at how this game is running across 8 or 9 different graphics cards. We got like all the RTX cards, we got multiple AMD cards, including the new Radeon VII on all the latest drivers, and all of that good stuff, testing at 1080p, 1440p, as well as 4K. Today's video is brought to you by LevelGo.com, where you could save money on games and software for your Windows 10 PC. And if you need a Windows 10 key, they've got you covered, where you can get a Windows 10 Pro key right now for just $15.75. Also, Microsoft Office 2016 for under $30, or 2019 Professional Plus for just under $60. And if you use my code JKL10 at checkout, you'll save 10% off your software purchase when you hit up LevelGo.com with the link down in the description below. Now, first off, I do want to mention that this game is actually supporting ray tracing and DLSS right at launch. I've had the game since last week. I was given this code by NVIDIA as full disclosure for you guys. Even though you saw in a recent video, I did buy the game on the Epic Game Store, which I then, after the fact, got a code from NVIDIA, which allowed me to unlock the game early, so I ended up refunding the game with Epic Games, the one that I did personally purchase. And I just want to let you guys know that as far as the game being on the Epic Games Store, the refund, just the experience of having to do a refund on there was absolutely horrendous. So I really hate the fact that this game is on the Epic Games Store. I was excited to buy it on there and support the developers and their decision because I love this series. But after my experience with buying the game and then later on trying to refund it because I had already got a code, there wasn't really much reason for me to own 2 copies of it. Yeah, my experience was absolutely awful, and I hate the fact that this is on the Epic Game Store only unless you had pre-ordered on Steam, and it's only going to be available on Steam like next year, like in 2020. So yeah, really awful experience with the Epic Game Store, and I'm sorry for anyone that does have to pick it up on there, but if you just want to play the game and you're not going to refund it or anything, I mean, I guess you'll be able to do it, or you can wait for a pirated version to come out, but it's got to do with DRM. Who knows how long that's going to be, and of course, I don't support piracy in any way whatsoever. Okay, so we're going to get into all the benchmarks here, but first I do want to go over the graphics settings used and, of course, which ones are available in the game. But I also do want to say that for this video, I did not test with any ray tracing or DLSS features because there are multiple GameWorks is also ray tracing DLSS, and since the AMD cards don't support, a lot of those features like ray tracing, DLSS, it just doesn't support them, and then things like Advanced PhysX and Hairworks could also impact AMD much more negatively than it would NVIDIA cards. I didn't feel like that was fair for a straight-up GPU comparison with the almost 10 cards that I tested here. So I am going to be doing a separate video on RTX cards where we take a look at all of the GameWorks features and the impact to performance those have, ray tracing on versus off, and then DLSS on versus off. But for any of you that are interested, I can say that DLSS in this game is supported at all resolutions. Well, I tested it at 4K and 1440. I haven't played around with it on 1080p yet, but if it worked at 1440, it should work at 1080p as well in pretty much all resolutions, which is the opposite of the new Battlefield patch, which added in DLSS, which I've been told only supported 4K, which is kind of weird. So, as I said, we're going to be taking a look at that in a separate video. Today, we're just going to be focusing on the GPUs here and really just benchmarking this game and seeing how it scales among the different graphics cards at the 3 most popular 16:9 resolutions that I previously mentioned. As far as my test setup for benchmarking this game, I was running on an i7-8700K at 4.8 gigahertz, along with 16 gigabytes of RAM, which is at 3200 megahertz. None of the cards were overclocked, but the power limit slider was increased all the way to the right, and I was running the latest drivers for AMD and NVIDIA. So for NVIDIA, that was 418.81, and for AMD, it was 19.2.1, which is brand new. That's not the press driver for Radeon VII. This came out right after the press driver. There were a few things fixed in that. Obviously, performance could get better a little bit later on with more drivers on the Radeon VII, but this is not the press driver. Just want to put that out there for anyone that might be curious. And here right now, we are on the Metro Exodus benchmark splash screen because it does have a benchmark which you can launch from the game's installation folder. And I just want to show you the options that the game has and also which ones I was using for my testing. So you can see my 3 different presets here 4K, 1440, and 1080p, all of them with no GW, which is no GameWorks. And you can see I was running at DirectX 12. It does support DirectX 12 and DirectX 11, so that's good to see. And of course, if you do want to use things like ray tracing and DLSS, you will be required to use DirectX 12. For quality preset, I was running on the extreme one, but they have low, medium, high, ultra, and extreme. We've also got texture filtering, the anisotropic, all the way up at 16x. Motion blur, I did set to low because there wasn't an off option, and I think we can all agree that motion blur looks horrible and is completely unnecessary. For tessellation, I was set to the full option, which is really just on because there's either off or there's full. When you go into the game, it's either off or on. There is no full option, so this is just technically tessellation is on. VSync, of course, we're testing it off for benchmarking purposes. And then the GameWorks features, which were not included in this video, are Advanced PhysX, Hairworks, Ray Tracing, and DLSS. DLSS, you could just put on. Ray Tracing does have off, high, and ultra. So with that out of the way, we'll take a look at some of the side-by-side comparisons with the NVIDIA versus the AMD cards. And after running this test, I did see a very slight advantage at the end in the graphs for AMD, which you'll be seeing in just a minute. But pretty much across the board, the NVIDIA and AMD cards, where they're competitors at certain price points, they're pretty much neck and neck. It's really, I mean, it's just, kind of like maybe like one or a few frames difference between AMD and NVIDIA cards. But, the takeaway really is that this game is very difficult to run on any card, either AMD or NVIDIA, and it's just going to really depend on how good of a graphics card that you have. Obviously, the best card that ran this was the RTX 2080 Ti by a significant margin here, but this is just really to give you an idea of how Radeon 7 is running it up against Vega 64 or AMD versus NVIDIA, however you really want to look at it. And this benchmark, I also do want to mention, is just really bad. Like, not bad, I shouldn't say bad, it's brutal. It's really, really intensive. Because it goes through a variety of areas. You've got clear weather outside, and then you go inside a house, and then you're inside a house where there's flames everywhere and smoke effects, to then you see, snow rushing into the house, and then you go outside into a snowy area where it's daylight, and then it turns to nighttime. So, the numbers that we see here with the average FPS, because at first I was like, man, these averages are so much lower than what I expected after actually playing the game. But during certain scenes of the game, I found areas where it was running, like half the frame rate that it was in some other areas because of smoke effects and particles and things of the like. So the game has a very, very big differential there between, what you'll see for the most part. I mean, for the most part, you're going to see, your average FPS much higher when you're actually playing the game. But then there's, the odd part where you'll go through an area where there's just tons of smoke everywhere and your frame rate will drop by like half because the smoke is just very realistic and super intensive to run on your GPU. Even this is with Advanced PhysX off, obviously. With that on, you could expect it to be an even bigger hit on the NVIDIA cards. So yeah, the benchmark is really tough to run, but I do think it actually does give us a good idea of how the graphics cards do scale, to one another. Obviously, the average FPS, I think, is a little bit lower than what you might see when you're actually playing the game, but that's just for the majority of the game. But there is going to be some times where you go through areas where you're going to be like, wow, this is much worse FPS than what I was seeing before. So definitely be aware of that. But after a lot of testing and also talking to other reviewers, I do think that the benchmark is actually pretty accurate compared to what you see in game, on the whole, because it does go through so many different scenes inside of a single benchmark. So in that way, it's really good, and the GPUs do scale accurately to what we would expect to see, in my personal opinion. So let's go into the graphs now. Here we'll start off at 1080p. Again, this is the Metro Exodus benchmark, extreme quality, no GameWorks, average FPS, and 1% lows. Obviously, you can see at the top of the chart here, we have the RTX 2080 Ti, which at 1080p is only averaging 76 frames per second with a 1% low of 47. And that low is really coming from those really intensive areas where there's smoke and fire inside of the benchmark. Because when I am playing on my 2080 Ti in my personal system, I've been playing 4K maxed out, and for the most part, I'm staying above 60 frames per second, even at 4K. But, as I said, there were some areas I went through where I was like, oh my god, now I'm getting like 25 frames per second because there was tons of particle effects on screen, so that's something to keep in mind if that's going to bother you. RTX 2080 and Radeon 7, as you can see, very neck and neck in the average FPS, but the frame times resulted in a much higher 1% low for the Radeon 7, and that was true on, I think, pretty much every AMD card here. You can see Vega 64 versus the RTX 2070 and the GTX 1080 getting much better 1% lows, which means it had better frame times. And then the average FPS also got 49 FPS versus the 43 of the 2070 and the 40 FPS of the GTX 1080. And all of that surprised me very much, as this is an NVIDIA optimized GameWorks title that they have pushed so hard with DXR features. So I guess good on AMD for being ready for this game, at launch, even though we haven't really seen optimized drivers yet. RTX 2060 getting 37 average FPS, 23%, 1% low. RX 590 getting an average of 32, and then the 1060 getting an average of 22 FPS. So it's really just that intensive, but this is the extreme quality. If you're playing on something like a 1060 at 1080p, you're going to really want to lower down that quality setting down to probably like medium or high, maybe even low. The game is that darn intensive to run. Going into the 1440p numbers now, here you can see the RTX 2080 Ti is again the only card that can average over 60 FPS, or 60 FPS I should say. All the other cards are down below 60 frames per second, and the 1% lows go even lower than that. So 1440p going to be very difficult if you're not on something like a Radeon 7, RTX 2080 Vega 64 or up. Really, those cards at up is really where you're going to want to be. And even with those, you're going to want to lower down some settings down to like high settings, very likely. Extreme quality is going to be rather difficult in some of the more intensive areas of the game, and especially running this benchmark. And at 4K, I would say, honestly, if you're not playing on a 2080 Ti, do not even apply. Like, do not even bother, learn to code. Kidding, that's a joke. RTX 2080 Ti, honestly, it's necessary for 4K. You need it for 4K. With RTX cards, DLSS is going to help a lot in terms of performance on this particular game. In some cases, it can give you double the performance. Although, in my personal opinion, and I'm going to talk about this again in the follow-up video where we test it, I thought the DLSS didn't look as good as in some of the benchmarks, because when you're actually able to walk around now and you're actually exploring in the world and you're really zooming on things, the image I feel with DLSS on is significantly softer. And I have personally, in my personal gameplay, when I'm just playing the game for my enjoyment, I have opted to use DLSS off as well as ray tracing, and then just play at 4K native, because I feel like that's giving me the best image quality without the trade-off of having a softer image, and the ray tracing just being an option where I don't feel like it's worth it, especially when you have DLSS off. DLSS on with ray tracing runs very well, over 60 frames per second most of the time, and that's at 4K on a 2080 Ti, but I didn't feel like it was worth the cost of having the softer image when I was running DLSS, which, as I said, I just don't think it looks very good. So yeah, that's really all I got for you guys today on the Metro Exodus benchmark. I'm going to continue testing it throughout the day on DLSS and ray tracing, and also taking a look at the new Battlefield 5 patch, which just added in DLSS support. So stay out and look out for that, because these are really the first two games that have supported DLSS in an actual game, and not just a closed benchmark like Final Fantasy 15 and the Port Royale benchmark. This is an actual game where we can test it, we can walk around, interact, and see how DLSS actually affects the game world. So stay tuned for that video coming in probably tomorrow. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, don't forget to leave a thumbs up on it down below. Subscribe if you're not already, and I will see you all tomorrow for that video. Tara?